Hello. Welcome to the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit. How are we all doing today? Doing all right? Cool. Welcome. So happy to have you. My name is Lito Rankin. I'm the programs manager for MOCAD. It's my honor and pleasure to be introducing this talk with artist Bree and Ryan Myers-Johnson. I'm going to slow down. To discuss Wend, currently exhibited in our video space. It's a film about ritual, space, power, and evoking the natural in our man-made environment. Bree is an artist and thinker from the west side of Detroit. They studied film at Howard University while gentrification paved over Washington, D.C., and moved back to Detroit when the city filed for bankruptcy to see the cranes had followed her home. She has held residencies and fellowships at Art Matters Foundation, Kresge Arts in Detroit, Red Bull Arts, People in Education, and Detroit Narrative Agency, and exhibits artwork nationally. Some of their most transformative experiences were collaborative, improvisational performances with folk like The Gathering, Visions of the Evolution, and the Fringe Society. Bree is currently researching the bodily experience of depending on the bus in the Motor City, binge-watching early 2000s science fiction, and probably at a park somewhere dancing in the snow. It is also Bree's birthday today. Let's say happy birthday. Ryan Myers-Johnson is an arts administrator, choreographer, and curator of place-based performance. She received her Bachelor's of Arts in Dance and Film from the University of Michigan. Ryan has extensive experience in event planning, arts administration, management, and leadership, stemming from her many years working in the feature film industry and dance production. A native Detroiter, Ryan spent 10 years as a professional dancer and filmmaker in New York, Japan, and Detroit. Additionally, she is the assistant director of Kresge Arts in Detroit, which has contributed over $4 million to the local creative economy through the Kresge Eminent Artist Awards and through Kresge Artist Fellowships. Ryan is dedicated to creating opportunities for independent and alternative artists in Detroit, with particular focus on the northwest side of Detroit, where she was born and raised. Myers-Johnson serves as the executive director of Sidewalk Detroit, an organization she helped found. As I said earlier, we're currently exhibiting Bree's work, Wend, in our dedicated video space. During today's talk, however, Kresge fellow Celia Benvenutti will be activating the exhibition with why can't I say that word today? Improvisational, I'm going to go with that, dance performance that is being projected behind our speakers. And with that, I'll just let them get to it.
Thank you, and thank you everybody who's come out to celebrate Bree on her born day. So this is amazing. Give it up one more time. Yes. Yeah, it's my honor. So I just want to jump right into having a conversation with this artist that I love and admire. So as we can see with your work behind us, you're exploring these really interesting intersections between movement, transit-based movement, and gender, Detroit, urbanity, black and brown bodies. There's so much going on in your work. What led you to this place of exploring movement in this way?
Yes, thank you so much, Ryan. I'm really grateful to be here with you all today talking about this work. It feels like a form of care and a gift to myself for my birthday, so deeply appreciate this. And yeah, I'm born and bred in Detroit, and I think my background in contemporary dance and depending on the bus in the Motor City led me to this concept of social choreography. And I'm thinking about the ways that social forces shape the workings of power in everyday life, and using dance as a metaphor and a research practice to kind of understand that, and especially how power affects and moves the body through life. And transit is a major example of that. Mobility, how we can move through our everyday, how we can get to our home, our work, our family and friends, how we can get beyond those spaces as well. And this is, I like to think of Wend as like, it's both the culmination and the beginning of this work. It's kind of it feels like field notes almost. It comes from my background as a documentary photographer, and I wanted to start assembling these notes that I've been taking over about 7 years and find the common themes in what this exploration of mobility and social choreography have been.
Wow, so there's so much that you said there. I'm going to go back to
Please.
the beginning about being a Detroiter and about transit in general. So, anecdotal story, one of the things that impressed me about you as I started to get to know each other is that when asking to meet Bree somewhere, she would say, I'm walking there. And I'm like, oh, can I pick you up? Do you need a ride? And I discovered that you were walking by choice. And so we had these really interesting conversations about the politics of being a pedestrian in Detroit. What does it mean to take the bus? And why are you choosing not to take the bus? As well as we've had these interesting conversations about the sort of arched eyebrow judgment that comes with choosing to be a pedestrian. Can you share more?
Yeah, so I went to school in Washington, D.C. I attended Howard University. And that was the first time that I depended on public transit. And it felt like freedom. I could get anywhere in the city, usually the library, on my own. And I didn't need a car. And it was also this sort of practice of civic engagement. I felt connected with the city. I felt like I was learning, grounding myself in a place that I was new to, and it was a way of connecting with people. Also, as a introvert, it was my form of social engagement to be on public transit. We were, it's almost like this shared purpose of moving toward a place and a goal along with other folks without actually having to talk to people and engage. And sometimes you do. You meet all types of characters, especially on the bus in Detroit. But again, I think the core of that work is that it's a civic engagement practice to take public transit in a city. Public transit is the cornerstone of a city. We're also learning, I think the car is very much a symbol of individualist capitalist society, and to completely depend on a car and to build a city around the car is not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. It's not a personal, healthy practice. It's unnecessary. And while a lot of the wealth that Detroit has found has come from the car, it's just not the place to ground how we build our city and how we move forward. We are innovators of mobility, and we can continue to be that without it being based on a car. And so for me, this practice of depending in public transportation has freed me in a way to exercise personal agency, to witness my city, to engage in embodied practice. It feels like a performance, especially in Detroit, to depend on the bus. And I think part of my work, it took me a while to understand my work as advocacy, but I do understand it as just inviting people to take the bus with me. There's no other advocacy you need to do. The more people that take the bus and choose to take the bus and engage public transit, support the system.
Wow, I love that you said it gives you an opportunity to witness your city. Is there something almost spiritual about that I think about? But I think I also heard, is there environmentalism there? There's activism around, you made a statement regarding capitalism, so there's a lot of layers between commerce, the spirituality of witnessing, being a community member, but can you talk more about the environmental aspect? We also see in this work, even calling it Wend, a lot of nature, trees, snow, passing of seasons. So can you talk a little bit more about your choice to explore this public space realm, to explore pedestrian life and its intersection with climate change and environmentalism?
Yes, I love this. And I also need you to talk more about Sidewalk at a point, because this is why I asked you to to speak here.
Okay, we'll see.
Just public space and moving and dance and art and how those things connect and support each other. But I love thinking about urban ecologies. I've come to this understanding of cities and city building and urbanism and city planning as it very much has the potential to be a love letter from humans to nature, but we currently engage cities and city building as sort of trying to control nature and build on top of nature as opposed to with it. And I think we're missing out on a lot of technology and growth because of that. But that's like Wend, these field notes that you see in the video has really shown me two things. One, that the dominant systems of our society currently are systems of control as opposed to systems of care, which is what governance should be. We have absolutely the potential, the resources, the capacity to take care of people, and right now our systems are more about order and control than care. And two, that we're bestowed with the spirit of discernment. We can still, despite these systems of control, make our own decisions and choices every day and choose community and choose growth and choose freedom. And understanding that we are not beyond, above, or in attempting to dominate nature. We are in harmony with nature. Cities, humans, our technology is not, we aren't trying to best Mother Nature. We don't need to best the earth. Most of our tech comes from learning from the earth and building on that and using our capacity and our mental, spiritual, bodily gifts in order to expand and grow that space. And especially being in Detroit, we are gifted with a city that affords us so much space. You know, I think that's beautiful. And while despite being a major city in the US, you'll see in some of the videos in Wend, it looks like a prairie. You know, that's also, you know, city care is a certain thing. But it very much, I used to be offended at Howard. People call us country, but I like it. We are a very country city in Detroit. And I think that's a gift. And I think that we have the potential to be a model for how to build cities that actually care for the earth and care for and learn with and are in collaboration with nature as opposed to attempting to dominate it.
Thank you. That was amazing. And I'm really not going to talk about Sidewalk very much, but I will say that some of the synergy that we have is that history of loving Detroit wild spaces and wanting to celebrate them and finding freedom there. I think that what you said about choosing freedom is really a political statement, especially, you know, as a Black femme, the idea that we can choose freedom. I really don't even know what the answer is, to be honest, because sometimes some dialogue, it seems like, do we have a choice here in what's happening to our bodies? But I think that your work is a rebellion against that narrative that says that, you know, as Black and brown people, as femmes, that we have to be afraid when we're in public spaces. I think that is what I'm trying to explore with Sidewalk, is this idea of creating joy and freedom and great expression that's integrated into the built and natural environment. But can you talk more about, that aspect of, and Celia is just really getting it right now, even with that Blackness, that femme idea of choosing freedom in public spaces?
Absolutely. And also, so part of the reason, Celia also happens to be my best friend, but she's this incredible dancer, choreographer, and we have been studying and traveling together for 2 decades at this point. And part of the reason that I wanted the talk to have this format is to further push this concept of arts-based research and conversation, right? Choreography is its own grammar and language, and Celia is brilliant, and you should follow her work and hear her speak at points, but this is also me inviting her into this panel conversation using movement. And I think that ritual and movement and dance absolutely change a space. You know, they have the capacity and the power to change and shape the spaces that we're in, and it's one of the core ways that I have found my personal power and agency and been able to affect change literally just by moving and dancing in a space, and also further connect you to the land and the place that you're in, which has been a perfect medium to explore these ideas of social choreography, mobility, and urban ecologies. Did I get lost from the question?
No, I think that you're going deeper, and there's so many layers to your work. I don't think that you lost it. You're just illuminating your relationship with Celia. I asked you about exploring choosing freedom, like as a Black femme in public space.
Yes. Right, and so especially in Detroit, as people who experience these marginalized narratives, we have a special place in this Black city to understand that, yes, systems of oppression are real, but there's also a lot of narrative that we have the opportunity to control ourselves. And for me, that's what my art practice has been about, developing systems of care and not just personal agency, but creating power and agency in the room, and understanding that we all have access to the same power and agency, and this isn't, like, no one can take your freedom from you. You have to choose it. You have to choose it. This is absolutely not about Black body conversations, nor is it about slavery is a choice conversations that some celebrities have brought up in such misguided fashion. But it is every day you wake up and you have the option to take care of yourself and take care of your people. And for some of us, it's a lot harder to access that option, but we still have to choose it. And that is it's definitely a responsibility, having this spirit of discernment and having this choice. And it's definitely the work that we're here to do, but it is a choice that we have to wake up and make every day, like life. You know, ultimately that is the thing of one of the things we try and get at with understanding human consciousness and spirituality is that we actually have a choice. We like to differentiate ourselves, you know. I don't know if suicide is a thing with animals in the natural world, but we have a choice to wake up and keep doing this work. And it's fucking hard, but we have to do it.
Yeah, that's every statement you make is there's so many layers to it. And so I'm thinking about the element of choice, and as you mentioned about how difficult it is, I think right now, in part, you know, why I started my work, and I wonder if this has anything to do, if this resonates to you at all, is that the narrative sometimes seems like it's already been decided. Like, you are a Detroiter, that means you need to drive unless you're suffering. You're a femme, so that means you need to be afraid. You're Black, and there's a lot in the media and the narratives right now that is about perpetuating fear. It's not about, and so I want to say here too, I'm not saying that we close our eyes to what's happening, but when you're faced with an onslaught, like an attack on a daily basis against, you know, your cultural self, that choice it's not always evident that you can change the narrative. So, wow, that's complicated for me.
Yeah, it's hard. And I think one of the things I've come to this year, or these past couple years, I've been in a lot of rooms where we're talking about what does community actually mean? And for me, I had to start interrogating that question with myself. Was I even in community with myself? So I have a lot of personalities going on in here, and they aren't always on the same page. But I am more grateful for them and for the difference within my own life experience as a self-body being. And learning that community, I think form and function are inseparable, right? They have this link. And the ways that aesthetic and art and image have been weaponized against us, especially as Black people with a very rich culture that has been very profitable for American culture, we understand that they are intrinsically linked. And for me, community has been understanding that relationship between form and function, between image and what actually my purpose is, and how those things relate and shape and move and care for my life. It's part of the reason I consider adornment a care practice. But I think we can lose sight of what our community is because of the way image and art and culture has been weaponized. And so taking ownership of our practice, working with people who recognize, and I don't even think, like, community doesn't mean consensus, for me at least, and working with people who recognize my narrative, like you and Celia and The Gathering, is just, it's transformative. And so you have to start with yourself and understanding what your narrative is, and understanding that that isn't, again, it can be given to you. You can receive, like, I appreciate receiving your witnessing and recognition of myself and my work. But that's, again, it's a choice. I'm choosing to receive that narrative from you as opposed to from what the mainstream has set out for us and what various other sources and even supposedly history has told us about who we are and our identity and our worth. So yeah, I think first, you get your story right with yourself, you get your story right with your people, and as we all know, a small group of humans can completely transform the world, so.
Thank you. So we've been really centering Detroit because that's where your roots are, that's where we are right now, and this piece is very Detroit centric, but you've traveled, you've been studying, you've been exploring transit and movement in other places. Can you talk about some of those other explorations?
Yeah, I love travel. I'm also very interested in this idea of Black space. I don't think that just having a room full of Black people makes a Black space. I'm learning that Black space is a lot bigger. There's vibration, it's literally a physics and understanding of time space that changes when we're in a Black space. And I often travel to other Black cities, so especially for residencies. I was just in Charlotte last fall. I returned to Puerto Rico, where Celia's family is from often, and we go to Guayama, the south end of the island. Havana, Cuba, just the air is different there. Ooh, man, healthcare is real. Free healthcare is real, and I think it just changes people. There's just a different stress level in certain places. So yes, it's the mobility of travel in itself, and then also witnessing and going to other cities and seeing how people move through their cities has been very transformative for me. Not in the sense that I need to move that way, but also being able to recognize different narratives and understand that that difference doesn't change my narrative or my power and my embodied knowledge of how I understand and move through the world. I fell in love with Detroit after I returned from college. Growing up in this city as a young, gifted, and Black person, many people tell you to leave. You have to leave the city. And there is, especially most of the successful artists I know have left the city and come back. And I think that that in itself is a gift to yourself and the city, to travel and then return. You can witness your city a different way when you leave and come back. But also there's something about the journey that is life, not destination, and traveling allows you to tap further into that power. Yeah, I like travel, I like places. I think I learned a lot moving around.
So, once again, so loaded. So, one of the first things you said in answer to that question was that a room full of Black bodies does not make a Black space. And talking about the air being different in some of these other spaces. Not to put words in your mouth, but I have found, as traveling, the idea of the public gathering space, the public commons, the freedom of just having that, as opposed to get in your car and go somewhere to buy something, was transformative for me. So could you talk a little bit more about, I don't know, how you observed Black spaces being formed, since it wasn't just a room full of Black bodies?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. One of my longest documenting commissions was with Reimagining Civic Commons, and they are a national group of a lot of well-meaning white people, and I learned a lot working with them. But they were here investing in Fitzgerald Park on the west side of the city, and I also got to travel to Memphis to do a studio learning session with them. And they talk about investing in public spaces. And as a wanderer, public spaces are for me. People think that I'm a public transit advocate. Really, I'm a bench advocate. I would just like to have a place to sit for free. And there aren't a lot of those spaces in Detroit. Like in Charlotte, there are benches everywhere in downtown. You could just sit down in a space. We don't have that as much here in Detroit. And I'm not sure we think about it. As a person who depends on the bus, if I go somewhere to meet someone at a place and it's not open yet, or if they're late, I would like to just sit down, and I can't unless I go into a store and buy something, and even then, that's just a limited time period. And so this understanding of the importance of not just public transit and libraries, but literally a public square. Where can we come and intentionally gather? Like we have creating a public square in a space is holding space for the intention to gather. And we don't have as many of those spaces in Detroit as other cities do. Like in Cuba, there are multiple public squares. In the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, there are public squares, and so many of these small cities have a public square that was very intentionally created, a space for people to gather for free with people they may know or may not know. Hopefully we'll know after they leave the public square, but there's a designed intention to hold space for gathering, and that changes the health of a city and a place.
Wow. So the last question I'll ask before I open up to the audience, so audience, if you have questions, please start thinking of them. We've talked a lot about architecture, about landscape design, city building, environmentalism, but I haven't gotten to ask you really about the art, I guess, the art. So it's with you, it's hard to separate the disciplines, the practices, because they're all intersecting. But can you talk a little bit more about, I guess, your aesthetic choices in terms of the type of movement that you're working with, and if you have time, thinking also about the intersection of like what type of choices you're making with film and video?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I really appreciate that question. I like to brag about my upbringing in Detroit. I grew up at a time where Detroit public schools had visual arts, music, and performing arts as part of the curriculum. Like, I got a grade for it. It was not the science teacher brought out a box of construction paper in their classroom and we made art. I went to an art studio and was graded on this work. And there was a cultivation of an appreciation for aesthetics and aesthetic value and form and experimenting and creativity in a dedicated classroom space, which I took for granted when I was younger, and I'm realizing now how much that helped me overall in my scholarship and in my life, and also in my family at home. My mom would then take me to Joann Fabrics and Michael's every weekend. I got all the craft kits, and it was a way of thinking through work that I realized in undergrad I needed to intentionally cultivate, because it is a life practice and it is a care practice. So I think I came into my creative voice and purpose through photography, which is still what I consider my primary medium, even when I don't exhibit in it as much. Visual composition is a thinking for me, understanding how things relate in pattern and spatial context visually helps me understand many concepts across disciplines. And documenting is coming from this, like, I love one of my favorite words, autoethnographic impulse. I would like to understand the greater world through my personal experiences. And it doesn't mean making everything personal, it's just understanding various patterns and things that are happening in my everyday rituals are not by happenstance, and they do matter. And I can see these greater cultural and political systems and understand them through my everyday experiences. And documenting has really helped me and support that. And it's not just documenting, but my self-portrait practice alongside being a social documenter has really cultivated that idea and that way of thinking in me. And so I went to Howard for international business, quickly got out of that. It's like, ooh, not it, this is not it. But I think I understand that now as coming from, one, I wanted to be able to pay my bills, but two, there was this interest in international conversations, and especially engaging international conversations from sites of power in the diaspora, which Howard University and Detroit are very much sites of power in the Black diaspora. Like, we're doing great, you guys. The more I travel, the more I understand the value of this city and being born and raised in this city. So I started, and my grandfather was a photographer, but he was just like the family photographer. He didn't do anything fancy, he just always had a camera. He had several cameras, and witnessing became integral to my practice. And moving back to Detroit and depending on the bus in Detroit sort of splintered my practice to understand the witnessing work I had been doing my whole life, not just in documentary photography, which I started working for the paper at Howard University, but also dance as a form of witnessing, and mark making as a form of witnessing. Printmaking has been my latest venture in this exploration of visual composition and performance. And so I think these forms, I've recently been taken to saying I have a critical embodied social practice. I am engaging art as my way of getting to know and moving through the world and creating community. And these forms have supported me, just this understanding of visual patterns, which has been a core of my work. And then performance as being able to connect with people on different levels. Like, I think performance at its core is an embodied social practice. It's being in your body in a particular place and being able to affect the spaces around you.
Thank you.
I could ramble for days.
That wasn't a ramble. This is what we're here for, to understand what is going on. It's the artist talk. So I think we have time for a couple of questions in the audience. Yes, Michaela.
Hey, girl. Thank you. Hey, Bree.
Hey, girl.
This question is, I'm always interested in lineage. And so you can take this in terms of whatever layer of your art practice. But yeah, I'm curious, what artist or artists, would you say you're working in the lineage of?
Woo. So many artists. Black queer feminism holds my practice. Feminism and spirituality really holds my practice as a framework. Catherine Dunham is a major influence for me. She's Black American choreographer, mother of modern dance, and founded this idea of dance anthropology and being able to understand and study different cultures based on the way that they move and celebrate and mourn through dance. More recently, oh my gosh, there are so many. I feel so seen by the work of Black women filmmakers like Jatavia Gary, Jen Nkiru, Naima Ramos Chapman, who all make these experimental works that are very much rooted in narrative and visual composition and consider the body and contemporary social issues. There's also Camila Rashad, who refers to herself as a learner as opposed to an artist, which I very much appreciate that practice. There's Catherine Simone Reynolds, who is an incredible lens-based artist and curator from St. Louis, who works across like psychosomatic landscapes and thinking about emotion and urge and how Black interiors affect the spaces around us. Yeah, I think those are my core. There are so many people in Detroit who inform and shape my practice, especially Celia Benvenutti, Dave Gully, who's a producer, and those are my two most common collaborators. And I think that their work, like despite Celia working primarily in dance, her quality of movement just speaks across lineages and across disciplines. And Dave Gully's music production is incredibly cinematic. Like I can see his songs, and I love that. I think that's such a gift. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Bree.
Hey, Dave.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I'm jealous of some of the places you've been able to travel and was just curious in your research, because I love what you said, just a bunch of Black people in a room doesn't make it a Black space. So what are some similarities and differences in that public transportation of those places you traveled that really stood out to you?
Ooh, that's a good one. So there's this practice, I think it's called the jitneys, what they used to call it. You could just get a ride. People, that's like, and I appreciate that as Black people with cars, right? You know, it's like a cab, but you're not a cab. It's just, you know, people have different gestures for trying to pick up a ride in places. But I mean, you're not supposed to get in cars with strangers, but I've done it in every place that I've traveled, and I've been covered and cared for. Some elder Black man or an auntie Black woman was like, girl, you look like you need a ride. And I'm like, I do, actually. In whatever language, like that's another thing I appreciate. I have studied Spanish for years. Can I speak it when I travel? It's debatable. But whenever there's a need, a care need, it's covered. You know, the language of humanity is real, and we can tap into that and trust that. And I have found that especially in navigating mobility in different cities and being able to find this covering and care for people offering rides with their own transportation, which I think is one of the gifts of a car, right? I think, you know, in Detroit, it'll be 3 people in a household and 5 cars in the driveway, which is a lot. You don't need that. And but I do appreciate the car as a tool, especially when people intentionally engage it to support their community and give rides, which is a big thing in Cuba. And I think that's where I found it most common. But also another thing I appreciated about Mexico and could relate to was that it wasn't walkable in the sense that there were paved sidewalks everywhere, but I encountered so many more pedestrians there. And so there were a lot of time-created walking paths in Mexico. You know that diagonal walking path across the empty lots in Detroit that you see? There was a lot of that in Mexico, and I still felt safe because of that. Like I knew I was not walking alone in this space, even though there wasn't a sidewalk and there wasn't always like the pedestrian crosswalk signage, but there were other people walking, and these paths were made before me that I could follow.
What up, though, Bree?
Hey, Bryce.
So my experiencing the film, the way that your body moved in public spaces, or just period, but in particular speaking to the public spaces, the body language, it felt as if, as much as the experience was for you, a ritual in that way, it also felt like there was the body as an instrument of radiating frequency and energy. It felt like there was a radiation happening, a casting, a spelling of sorts. I'm interested to know if there's a conscious element of you being in public space, like this is me radiating on purpose to leave a particular energetic signature here for people to pick up on.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that question because I often run into this language of intervention and disruption in contemporary performance art, which I'm not intervening in nobody's shit. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that work. I'm trying to be here. I'm trying to get to where I'm going. And that's part of the reason why I use minimal crew. Like the videos you see of Celia, I shot when we were like just on our way to the bar to hang out. I was like, can we take this moment to create this magic in this space? But most of them, there is an intention to affect the vibration, affect the space. I've been calling it energetic mark making, to shift the space and the way people move around us by engaging our agency and choosing freedom, and choosing to move differently. There's also, I'm interested in thinking about accessibility and disability justice and disability studies, because people just move differently in spaces. And yes, I look able-bodied, but sometimes I need to dance through this space because that's just how I have to move in the moment. I can't just walk like this. This isn't always what my body is called to do. And I think moving in this way creates more space for other people to move however they need to move through the space. I also like to think about, and even, even in spiritual traditions, my spiritual understanding, scholarly understanding, mind, body, and environment are inseparable, right? Like we can meditate, soul travel, have out-of-body experiences, but we are never actually disconnected from our bodies, and our bodies are never disconnected from the places that we're in. And for me, that relationship, mind, body, environment, is spirituality. It's land reverence, it's indigenous practice. And that's part of what this work is. It's intentionally being in place. That is a source of power, that our mind is connected to our body, is connected to this land. And so intentionally leaning into that for me through the practice of dance and visual composition is a spell, and is also inviting other people in community to lean into that too.
I don't have a mic, but I want to be like, drop.
Hey, friend.
Hey.
So I'm excited. You and I have been talking about our work together for a long time and picking through things. And so this is a little bit of a selfish question that I hope other people will get something out of. But as people who have this kind of impulse to document and kind of probably have a bunch of hard drives with a bunch of video and sound, for me it's less about doing something with it or having an idea about why I'm doing it. It's an impulse. And so I'm curious, in your process of putting together this work, we're able to see documentation from a decade ago or from so many different time points in your process, the field note journey. What is it like kind of trolling through your own archive? Can you talk us through that process? Do you have an idea and then you're like, oh, I shot this video back in
2008 at that very specific plaza, and that's what's needed in this moment? Or is it kind of like you look through your files and then you formulate the story from there? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Can you talk us through it?
It definitely does. Ash Arter is an incredible artist and also has this newsletter called Field Notes that I've been thinking a lot about lately. But so yeah, I have the impulse to document a moment, right? And then it's there on my hard drive. And I'm like, ooh, it's happening. It's always gonna be happening because now it's on my hard drive. I also feel like the being in place thing, the mind-body environment, can be a time travel too, because I'm with all the other people who have been in this place and on this land, and I'm connecting with them and helping them move in my time, and they are helping me move in their time. But so I have so many hard drives, and this work came about because I fell into the pattern about a year ago, right around the time that Jova Lynn invited me to do this exhibition in early 2022. I was like, oh no, I have been doing a thing. You know, you don't, especially as artists who are deep in ritual and following purpose and connection, you're like, I have to do this thing. I don't know why, I don't know what it's for, but I have to do it. And so finally, last February, around my birthday, I was like, oh no, I have been working towards something. This is a thing, it's a pattern, it's wending through my everyday life, and it actually shows these greater connections to cultural and political systems that absolutely have deep personal meaning for me, but can also be an invitation for people maybe not to agree with me on the way systems work and culture shifts, but to self-examine. So yeah, I think my impulse to document comes from a couple places. Sometimes there's the artist in me and the designer in me that sees a pattern line up, and I want to capture that work and that aesthetic. There's also the Black anthropologist in me that is like, this is very much a defining moment of the diaspora and whatever that means, and I'm trying to extend and archive that. And then there's also more recently been just living in Detroit and being shocked every few minutes. But I'm like, there was something there that's not there anymore. What happened to it? Where is it? Am I in the right place? I was driving home the other day, and there's like a new building going up off of Southfield, and I thought I was lost. I thought I went the wrong way. No, it's not true. It's just new things, giant things happening right when you're coming up off 96 and getting onto Southfield North. It's a new building over there. Don't get confused. It's there. It's wild. It's a very massive warehouse. It's like, this is not my home, but it is. So archiving helps me time travel in that way, and I don't often have, like I knew I wanted to do dance film off stage. Like this wasn't specifically just about the choreography, it was about the being in place, and I wanted to investigate locations using dance, but did I know that it was gonna be Wend? Mm-mm. That birthed after almost a decade of documenting.
Hey, Bree.
Hey, boo.
I have a question about your practice. I've known you for a while, and we would have a lot of conversations about disrupting white spaces. And I wonder what this new invitation into your work of like being in spaces, what that's done for this Bree in your work as it relates to speaking about. I feel like in this practice, there's no consideration of that space anymore, and this feels very different. And so I wonder what that's done for past Bree and this Bree now.
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely been a practice of ownership and recognition of myself. Gentrification was just so terribly frustrating coming back from Washington, D.C. Like literally the year I graduated, those petty ass newspaper headlines were like, DC is no longer Chocolate City. That was on every newspaper in 2011 because it was 51% white at that point. And I was like, what? What is this? And I moved back home with all this hullabaloo about Detroit being an art city and coming back, and so many spaces were just filled with white people, and I felt the need to resist that and fight that, and that's not who I am. So leaning more into my art practice and trusting this work of care and knowledge production kind of led me here to Wend, which again isn't about disruption or intervention. It's just about trusting myself and my community and my lineage and knowing that there is so much space and resources for folks to live and exist, and that gentrification is not for me, and it's a lot more complicated than I understood it to be. But there are ways to invest in and develop community that don't have to look like erasure and whitewashing. And it also doesn't have to look like deviating from your center and your norm. So this was me just holding space for me, and I appreciate that question. It's me not, I appreciate elders who say don't romanticize the struggle, like the work is the work, and we do have to acknowledge, I mean, everybody doesn't, but I'm acknowledging that we are living under systems of oppression, and this isn't how life has to be. No matter who's in power or what's happening, it's not how it has to be. And so this work is just like leaning into that trust and understanding that even these systems of power and the people who created them, they're not the center of my world. You know, they aren't the arbiter and the declarer of my narrative.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hey, Halima.
Hi, Bree. Hi, Ryan. I'm so happy you all are doing this talk together, and thank you for sharing your genius with all of us. And I love what you were just saying, because my question is kind of touching on like that line of being in care and being in public space, and then noticing public spaces becoming more and more corporatized, more and more rules. I was just at Gabriel Richard Park, and I'm noticing like this list of like 20 things you can't do. You can't DJ, you can't barbecue. They say if you want to hold a workshop or class, you have to clear it with the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy first. Like, what? And so it's like, I guess the question is like, what narratives or how do you hold that space of pushing back and being your full self and care for community, and what needs to shift to have more like authentic public space in Detroit? So yeah.
I know, right? Yeah. I'm gonna answer that. I'm also gonna give you the mic to respond to that too, because you do this work. But so that's one of my favorite parks. And my mom tells me that she used to take me and my sister there all the time when we were younger. We also, Celia and I have held a couple pop-up classes there. I totally didn't know that you couldn't do that. So, whatever. For me, it's about communication, you know? I think, like, no one came up to us and told us we couldn't hold class then, but if someone had, then let's talk about it right now. And I haven't always been met with the best response from people who have certain authority over those spaces. But that's not my problem. My thing is to do the work and to communicate clearly about it. And I have been blessed to be held and cared for and held space for whenever that has happened. And I think one of my biggest lessons in community work is that both intention and impact matter, right? So I can intend to have what is, to me, a peaceful gathering of folk, Black women dancing outside at the park, and someone find that disruptive. But I think engaging that conversation has almost always led to people understanding the difference between control and care, or at least I won't assume that there was an understanding, but recognizing that whether the question was an issue of I'm exercising authority right now, or this is care for community and for this space. And I'm respecting more when I'm called to be the one to bring up that conversation. I'm also respecting myself more and not doing no extra work to have people understand the answer to that conversation, even if I'm the one to bring it up. I appreciate my gift of teaching, but I also appreciate paychecks, and so it's not for me to explain to you, but I can offer you this question and this observation of actually what is the wrong thing that's happening here? Is it because I didn't ask someone permission, or is it because we're actually disrupting something at this park? And I have had to pack up and leave spaces before, and that's just, the thing of it and what it is. But I also, again, I'm just incredibly blessed to be surrounded by the people in this room, folks like Ryan. I understand and know. Oh, fun size. It's okay. But yeah, I understand and know that, things, I appreciate having the opportunity to hold space for those conversations, and I'm learning where the boundaries are on me not doing the extra work to have people understand the answers. And I also learn a lot from, again, folks like you and Ryan about what it means to be in community and do that work and take that responsibility, or have and accept that responsibility. I think it's just, baby steps of going through the motions and being in that space. I don't understand it. I also have a personal insecurity about taking up space, and I've tried to make myself small often, and I'm realizing that I'm not taking up space. I'm literally just being and living. So I don't need to do any extra work to take up space, but being in places, again, being in space, moving freely is the work and is advocating for that space and community care, especially when you're considering the people that you're in relationship with and moving with.
I had to write it down.
Hey, boo.
Hey, so as you're witnessing different Black spaces globally, what are you learning about Black indigeneity and Black ways of knowing, specifically the overlap between cities and places, and how are those things influencing the way you document?
Come on, question. Right? That is the question. That is the thing of very much at the core of my practice. I love thinking and talking about Black indigeneity and what it means to be in indigenous peoples and engage indigenous practices. I very much believe in Black and Native solidarity, and I have been invited into conversations in Detroit about understanding Blackness and especially Black American peoples as an indigenous people, and making a distinction, it's not mutually exclusive, between Native American and indigenous, right? So indigenous practice is honoring the land, being in place, respecting our connection to the earth and natural resources, and honoring that and it's not a matter of whether it's a formalized system or not, but it is a matter of being in relationship with other and with place. And I think that's one of the strong points, especially about Detroit. We have this understanding and connection and respect for place. Not all of us be taking care of the earth the way we need to, but we are all learning. It's a learning curve. But we do have this innate connection to place and respect for place and rooms and honoring the people that are around us and the space that we're in. And I feel like being able to travel and witness that in other people's has made me closer to Detroit. And it's a practice that I want to continue forever, for as long as I'm capable of moving through the world. But yeah, I think especially, and it's also been through dance and grounded work. Like Black dance, Catherine Dunham literally changed the game and changed the way people understood connection to ground and floor work. I don't know why, but white people were not bending their knees in dance. You know, like that bending your knees and moving your hips came from Black dance practices. And that is what modern dance and grounded floor work, contemporary work is all based on. And that's also why it's the core of my personal indigenous practice, is literally just leaning your weight into the earth can change the way you think about being connected to the earth and deepen your practice of understanding that we are absolutely and innately connected to the places that we're existing in and moving through, and that this place, this earth, shapes us as much as we shape it. I also have this really dreamy idea of, again, cities being this ultimate love letter from humans to nature and working in collaboration with it. And especially it comes from Nnedi Okorafor. She is an incredible science fiction fantasy writer, African futurism, and writes these stories with tech that's made of plants. And I love it so much. The buildings are made of plants, they're cared for by animals, and it's people are living, the cities are literally cultivated from the earth. And I find, especially in Black space, that is what's happening. We use what's available to us, often rooted in recycling, that we don't use that language of recycling. It's just that we have this material, we're gonna use it again, it's useful. And that I realize I've mostly traveled to Black spaces, so I don't have a lot to compare it to. I've been thinking about this as I'm applying for work and for grad school, that I haven't spent that much time in spaces that aren't Black space. But I do consider Blackness as a theory and culture as a deeply indigenous practice.
So, thank you so much, Bree and audience. And are y'all ready to sign up for her university course on urbanism and Black spaces? Wow. I've seen people taking notes. I think you're ready for that. It's the next career move. So thank you all so much. Please check out the exhibit and follow Bree. Thank you again. Have a good one.
Hi, you can follow me at Bree in Transit. That's Bree with 2 E's on Instagram. That's it. Or gant.studio is my website. I'm around.